Imagine yourself under the scorching sun of the Egyptian desert, some 4,500 years ago. There, before your eyes, stands a marvel so imposing that it has stood the test of time, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now think about it. How is it possible that, without the help of cranes, excavators, or any modern technology, these ancient builders erected something so majestic? Let's talk about the numbers of this majestic construction. The Great Pyramid has a height of 481 feet. That's about 146.6 meters. To put that into perspective, that's almost like 30 giraffes stacked on top of each other. And this colossal structure wasn't just the tallest in the world for a breath of time, but for over 4,000 years. Just imagine, in that time it has seen civilizations come and go, stars move across the sky, and yet it has stood firm. And when you think about the weight, the Pyramid of Giza is very heavy, with its 6 million tons. That's something like 15 Titanics put together, only made entirely of stone. Compared to one of today's giants, the Burj Khalifa, which only weighs 500,000 tons, the pyramid makes the skyscraper look like a featherweight. And despite scorching summers, storms, and torrential rain, this structure remains standing as a testament to human ingenuity. There is no other structure as old and as grand as this still standing. This pyramid is not just a pile of stacked stones. It is a true engineering enigma. To begin with, this marvel covers an area of approximately 13 acres. Let's think of it as about 10 soccer fields put together, all covered by a single impressive structure that rises to a height of 481 feet. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty from base to torch. The base of this pyramid is so perfectly level that the maximum difference is less than an inch. That's something that even today, with all our technology and laser leveling equipment, would be an immense challenge. What about the walls? Well, each side of the pyramid is about 756 feet long, and believe it or not, if you measure all the sides, the difference between them is less than 2 inches. This means that, in terms of precision, they hardly differ from each other, with an accuracy of almost 100%. So, you know how at some times of the year, it seems like we barely have time to enjoy the daylight before the sun goes down? And at others, the days are so long that you can get a lot done before it gets dark? This is because, depending on the time of year, the days can be shorter or longer. But there's a super interesting detail. There are 2 special days in the year when day and night divide the 24 hours of the day equally, each getting 12 hours. They happen around March 21 and September 23. On these days, the sun is positioned exactly on the equator. This means that the sunlight is distributed equally to the north and south of the planet. This phenomenon is called the solar equinox. You've seen one of those big pyramids in Egypt in photos or movies, right? They seem to have 4 sides that form the base and meet at the top, forming a tip. But here's a curious fact that will make you think. The pyramids actually have 8 sides, not 4. Wait a minute, 8 sides? What do you mean 8 sides? Well, that's the interesting part. You can only see these 8 sides at very specific times of the year, on the days of the equinoxes, when day and night are the same length. At the equinoxes, if you were flying high above the pyramid and looked down, you would see this unique feature. This incredible discovery was made back in 1940, and the first person to see it was a British Air Force pilot who was flying over the Great Pyramid. So why does this happen? Well, it's a whole play of light and shadow that only reveals itself when the sun is in a very special position in the sky. On those equinox days, the sunlight hits the edges of the pyramid in such a way that the folds, or additional sides, become visible. The 3 largest pyramids in Egypt are all located on the Giza Plateau and were built by pharaohs from the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, Pyramid of Khufu, or Cheops. The largest of the 3 pyramids was built by the pharaoh Khufu. This pyramid, also known as the Great Pyramid, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one that remains practically intact. Pyramid of Khafra, or Khafra. Khufu's son, Khafra, built the second pyramid, which is slightly smaller than his father's. The Pyramid of Khafre is notable for still having part of its original limestone cladding at the top. Khafre is also credited with building the Great Sphinx of Giza, which stands next to his pyramid. Pyramid of Menkaure, or Mykerinos. The smallest of the three Great Pyramids was built by Menkaure, grandson of Khufu and son of Khafre. Despite being the smallest, the Pyramid of Menkaure is admired for its intricate details and quality of construction. The ancient Egyptians were big fans of the afterlife. They believed that dying was not the end, but only the beginning of a new life. But to ensure that this adventure was first class, the pharaohs prepared their tombs with everything they might need in the afterlife: food, treasures, jewelry, and even furniture. And to make sure that they would continue to live in eternal luxury, their bodies were mummified and housed in sarcophagi, waiting for the day when they would be called to the afterlife. Just imagine the scene. A pharaoh waking up in the afterlife, stretching out his arms and saying, "Ah, finally, a good stone sarcophagus." I slept like a mummy, but seriously, with such a mystery in hand, it didn't take long for alternative theories to start popping up. Some theories say that the pyramid was practically the world's first power station. There are also those who say it was a place to store wheat from the harvest. To give you an idea of the grandeur of what we're talking about, the stones were huge and weighed between 2.5 and 80 tons each. Yes, we're talking about stones that could weigh more than 12 elephants combined. And all this, carved and fitted together with incredible precision, at a time when modern tools were something out of this world. Now think of stacking those stones without a wheel at your disposal. All this was done, according to researchers, in 20 years. Oh, and you know that image from the movies, with slaves being forced to build the pyramids under the lash? Well, you can forget that. Research shows that the pyramid builders were actually highly specialized workers. They were well-fed, strong, and loyal to their pharaoh. They lived in villages close to the construction site and worked around 10 hours a day. It is estimated that between 20,000 and 30,000 people worked together, moving around 5.5 million tons of limestone and 8,000 tons of granite, much of it obtained very close by. The most distant material came from southern Egypt, 500 miles away. Just imagine the logistics. They also had to be creative with the tools they used, all of which were made of copper. They found huge granite boulders, but instead of trying to saw them with copper tools, because that would be basically impossible, they used dolerite stones, which are a bit harder, to hit and break the granite. Now here comes the really clever trick. They looked for natural cracks in the rocks, stuck wooden wedges into these cracks, and then wet the wood. As the wood absorbed the water, it expanded inside the crack. And believe it or not, this pressure was enough to break the rock. It's like putting water in a bottle and freezing it. The water expands and the bottle cracks. To move the rocks, a clever idea they had was to use rafts. They built large rafts and used them to float the heavy stones down the River Nile, directly from the quarries to the pyramid construction site. When the stones arrived, they had another trick up their sleeve: sledges. But it wasn't as simple as putting the stones on a sled and pulling. The desert soil is super sandy, and dragging something heavy across it is very difficult. Here comes the really fascinating part. They discovered that wetting the sand before dragging the sled made the job much easier. That's right, just pouring a little water on the sand reduced friction, making it much easier to slide the huge stones as far as they needed to go. This incredible idea is not just a guess. It was inspired by an ancient painting found in the tomb of Jehutihotep, which shows an exact scene of this technique in action. In the painting, you can see a giant statue being pulled by 170 people on a sled, and there's someone pouring water right in front of the sled to facilitate the movement. The researchers even tested the idea and found that it really works. A little bit of water, about 2% to 5% of the volume of the sand, can make a big difference. So, once the huge stones had reached the pyramids, the big challenge was how to stack these heavy stones on top of each other without cranes or any modern machinery. Well, even without today's technology, the ancient Egyptians were very clever. They didn't have pulleys or wheeled vehicles like we know, since these inventions didn't exist at the time. But they had something just as ingenious. They used ramps. In 2015, researchers from England and France found a wooden ramp more than 4,500 years old in a quarry. They believe that the ramps were built with a gentle slope that went from the ground to the top of the pyramid. To carry the stones uphill, the Egyptians placed wooden pillars along the sides of the ramp. They then passed ropes around these pillars and used human strength to pull the stones up. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. It was based on studies and even some ancient works of art that show similar processes. A physicist called Joseph West suggested it in 2014, thinking about how this technique could be used. And how did they stack the stones? Here come two brilliant ideas from the ancient builders. First, about making the ramp longer so that it isn't steep. Think of a skateboard ramp. If it's too steep, you'll go down fast and maybe even fall off. But if it's longer and less steep, you can get down more easily, right? The Egyptians used the same principle. They made the ramp very long so that the slope was gentle. This made it easier to climb up the stones without having to make a Herculean effort. Now, about the idea of levers. It's like using a stick to lift something heavy off the ground. You place one end of the stick under the object, find a fulcrum, and then push down on the other end of the stick. With less effort, you can lift things that would be impossible to lift with just your hands. They could have used this technique to help lift the stones to the higher parts of the pyramid. One doubt that researchers still have to this day. The bottom layers of the pyramids were built without mortar, while the top layers were built with a special mixture that to this day, with all our science, we haven't been able to reproduce. And this mortar isn't just any mortar. It helped these giant structures to stand for thousands of years, withstanding earthquakes and everything else. Have you ever wondered how the ancient pyramids of Egypt are so perfectly aligned? I mean, they're pointing exactly north, south, east, and west with an almost negligible error. Now think about it. They did this incredible job without a compass, without GPS, nothing like that. So how did they achieve this jaw-dropping accuracy? Scientists have several theories, but one of the most interesting involves the autumn equinox. This is a time of year when day and night are exactly the same length, thanks to the Earth's position in relation to the sun. During the equinox, if you're in the right place, the shadow you cast on the ground at midday will point straight east or west. The ancient Egyptians could have used this moment to mark the exact directions and thus build the pyramids with this almost magical precision. In 1989, a writer called Robert Bauval had an idea that sounds like something out of a movie. What if the pyramids were built to imitate the stars? He observed that the three Great Pyramids seemed to be aligned in the same way as the three stars in Orion's belt. This idea is known as the Orion correlation theory and suggests that the Egyptians were not only master architects, but also understood the heavens. They followed the stars, used them to plan crops, and perhaps to design their pyramids. But not everyone buys this idea. Some critics point out that the pyramids were built at different times, not exactly at the same time, which would complicate this stellar theory. Furthermore, when astronomers reviewed this theory more than a decade later, they concluded that the pyramids and the stars of Orion don't line up perfectly. This debate shows how we human beings love to find patterns, even where there may not be any. Faced with the unknown, our imaginations run wild and we create theories, such as the idea that aliens built the pyramids. The truth is that we still have a lot to learn and discover. And while we don't have all the answers, stories and theories like these keep us dreaming and questioning, keeping the mystery of the pyramids alive. Maybe one day, with more research, we'll be able to unravel this enigma. Would you like to see the Great Pyramid of Giza?